The ideas that gave birth to our nation are the ideas that our nation is resistant to right now, and we should talk about that all the time.
In a world where narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers, independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
It's authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the f*** up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening. Today is Black Monday, the day the Dow dropped more than 500 points.
Please join me in welcoming George Soros.
It's panic. Everyone's everybody would try to find a bottom.
To stand up and do something, become really engaged in the electoral process in this country.
What we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh, and they've been stuffing their pockets with money. But they must realize that this bowl of vampires is about to end.
We have an army of digital soldiers.
That this is coming. This is going to be a part of a future where we can take back our power in ways we didn't even think about in the industrial age that are coming in the digital age.
But the common people of these countries in their heart, they can feel what's happening. They can see our struggle for our independence, for our true sovereignty. And they see this connection with their aspirations to be truly independent, which is exacerbated by the fact that in the Western elites there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next President of the United States, enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
People who don't believe are walking dead. They are asleep. And this is the awakening.
History's greatest oil monopoly are actually pretty humble. It all starts in 1839 with the birth of John Rockefeller in upstate New York. He was the eldest son of a traveling merchant who identified himself as a botanic physician, but in reality was selling the 19th century equivalent of homeopathic medicine. He would spend weeks away from home and in fact would have several children with another woman, who he decided to bring back home to his wife so they could all live together. In this very confusing household, John would grow up learning how to hustle people for the best deal possible and how to get the most out of every penny he got. His family would rarely stay in one place for long, and John would live this nomadic lifestyle ever since he was 3 years old. To help his mother, John would earn any money he could by raising turkeys or doing work for neighbors. His intelligence was put to good use when the family moved to Cleveland, Ohio in 1854, where he got the chance to attend a proper school. But less than a year later, John dropped out in order to work as a bookkeeper at the local produce broker. He would earn 50 cents per day, which obviously wasn't much at the time, so he would help other companies on the side. But after 2 years of working there, his bosses refused to give him a meaningful raise, so he decided to one-up them by starting his own produce brokerage. Thanks to his good reputation, he got a loan of $4,000, which at the time was a huge sum. John started trading hay, grain, and various meats, and in his first year, he recorded sales of $500,000, of which he only got a small fraction as commissions, but still it was a huge success. Every bank in Cleveland was begging John to borrow money, and he was barely 18 years old. But then in 1859, something happened that would change his life forever. Just 100 miles east of Cleveland, the first American oil well had been discovered. This marked the beginning of the Pennsylvania oil rush, and within a year, 4,500 barrels of oil would be produced. Now, back then, oil wasn't quite as valuable as it is today. Gasoline cars hadn't been invented yet, but oil could still be processed into kerosene, which people would then use in lamps. John realized, however, that the biggest profits to be had weren't in drilling for oil, but in refining it. He witnessed many people going bust before striking oil, so he knew that the business was too risky for him. Instead, he'd let others go through the hassle of finding the oil, and he would just buy it off of them. John had to wait until 1863 for the government to build a rail line connecting the Pennsylvania oil fields to Cleveland. But when that line was built, John was ready for it, with a long line of partners and banks ready to back him up. He also assembled a team of seasoned chemists and engineers, who not only optimized the refining process, but also discovered various uses for the byproducts of refining petroleum. You see, the early refineries in Cleveland could only operate at about a 60% efficiency. But John not only increased that percentage, he also started selling all the byproducts, like paraffin wax, tar, and naphtha. Within 2 years, the Rockefeller refinery was worth over $70,000 and was among the largest in Cleveland. But John wasn't done. In 1865, there were 26 competing refineries, but within 5 years, John had acquired all but 4 of them. By this point, his business was getting too big to handle as a partnership, so in 1870 he incorporated as Standard Oil of Ohio. To convince the few remaining competitors in Cleveland, John would simply invite them over and show them his books, revealing that he could operate at a loss far longer than they could stay solvent. In exchange for a good buyout price, John would offer his competitors positions in his own company, thus placing the brightest minds in the industry under his control. Of course, not everyone would give up immediately, and over time, John eroded the price of oil and kerosene, sometimes by as much as 80%, in order to strangle competitors. Unsurprisingly, his strategy worked. By 1880, he had acquired refineries across the northeastern US and was refining over 90% of the entire country's oil production. At this point, John was so powerful that he could invite the owners of the big rail companies and personally negotiate rebates for using their trains. But this practice of negotiating backroom deals really got the business world riled up. At the time, and still kind of today, most industrial goods were transported by rail. And many big industrialists got worried that John's abuse of transportation rebates could result in similar monopolization in their industries. Over the next decade, businessmen, politicians, and the media would attack Standard Oil with increasing ferocity. Legislators in Ohio began drafting antitrust regulations to bring down Rockefeller, but he was one step ahead. In 1882, he reincorporated in New Jersey, this time creating the Standard Oil Trust, which in turn held stakes in over 40 local companies. Then, to showcase his success, John built an impressive headquarters for his company on Broadway. This moment was the high point of Rockefeller's Standard Oil. He owned 20,000 oil wells, 4,000 miles of pipeline and employed over 100,000 people. But his grip on the oil industry was loosening, both domestically and abroad. Massive oil deposits had been discovered in Russia and in Asia, and were being developed by the Rothschild family, which spared no effort in getting that oil to America. Worse yet, in 1890, the federal government passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, which officially gave politicians the teeth to go after the Standard Oil Trust itself. Of course, the complex legal structure behind all the companies was very difficult to investigate, which is why the government couldn't actually break up Standard Oil until 1911. By that point, however, John Rockefeller had already cashed in and was no longer actively managing the company. In the final 20 years of his company's existence, it had paid out over $500 million in dividends. By some estimates, the true worth of Standard Oil at its peak was $1 trillion, so the breakup didn't really come as a surprise to most people. In 1911, the Supreme Court found Standard Oil guilty of anti-competitive practices and broke the company up into 34 separate entities. Of course, John Rockefeller kept his stake in those companies until his death. And in fact, it turns out that the breakup was the most profitable event in his life. You see, over time, many of those companies merged back with one another. Today, most of the Standard remnants are part of either ExxonMobil, Chevron, or BP, which have since become incredibly large companies in their own right. John Rockefeller's ownership of these successor companies made him the richest businessman to have ever lived, with an estimated net worth of $400 billion. Even today, no one has beaten Rockefeller in the leaderboard. Not even Jeff Bezos himself seems likely to achieve that. But there's one thing that Jeff Bezos does have that John Rockefeller never did, despite all his money, and that is access to Dollar Shave Club. I mean, look at him. It's clear that this man cares.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Book of Trump. I'm your host, Gordon McCormick, the ghost of base Patrick Henry. This is Badlands Media, and tonight we are doing Chapter 51, which is the Rockefellers. And we are joined tonight by a special guest, our good friend, Jordan Sather. Jordan, how are you this evening?
Doing good, my friend. It's always a great night when we shit on the Rockefeller family.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I'm stumbling a bit saying this because we're pre-recording. It's the afternoon, but it's just a few hours before the show's going to air. So this is pre-recorded, but yeah, this is a great topic to bring you in on. And really the reason that I backed into this was because I was originally going to do Henry Kissinger, which we'll cover next week. But the deeper I went into Henry Kissinger, the more I realized how relevant the Rockefeller family was. And then once you look at the grandfather of the Rockefellers that I was looking at, which are the guys from the 1950s, which we'll get to them, it really comes into your wheelhouse. But it also kind of brings everything full circle because it talks about the education system, the medical industrial complex, the banking system, corporate America. I mean, the origins of all those things as we know it, spinning out of the late 1800s, early 1900s. So I wanted to kick it to you to kind of take us down a few rabbit holes as you see it. Before we get there, though, the cold open that I did, shout out to the channel Business Casual. It's where I'll drop the link in the comments that who made that video. I just thought that was a really good, concise, kind of informative backstory because we really want to speak more about the other aspects of the family, but understanding the origins kind of the Rockefellers is really important because what the Rothschilds were to Europe, as I understand it, the Rockefellers were to America, right? Like the Rothschilds were like the big banking dynasty in Europe. They were in all the different kingdoms, the different castles, the different dynasties, right? As their bankers. The Rockefellers come in and really use the quote unquote free market that America offered, right? Because America was a totally different concept from what Europe was, and took corporate law, kind of like used corporate law to establish effectively what the Rothschilds built in Europe, right? The consolidation of power, the consolidation of wealth, the consolidation of resources.
And there's always been competition between these different New World Order families, but because there is a general understanding between them of their agenda and where they want it to go, even though there is some competition between them, there is a general consensus of, okay, we're on the same page of how we're going to bring out our agendas and use other private companies or governments to consolidate power between us. Yeah, minor power struggles, but in general, they're always on the same page. And that video you shared there was a great backstory of how the Rockefellers here in America started gaining their wealth in the late 1800s, primarily through, the oil industry, but also the other industries that supported the movement of energy. So steel, with having to build the pipelines and the railways, investing also in the railways, also investing in copper for transmission wires and things like that. So anything that supported the movement of energy at the beginning of the industrial age, the Rockefellers were one of those families that had their hands in just about all of it. And then when they built their wealth in the late 1800s, they started then using that wealth to clamp down on every facet of society, every industry of society that would help them and their sort of same oil baron banking families to basically control the public and control the country with. So in my opinion, the most important era of history to understand, to learn about, to understand why the world is, why the country is the way it is now, is the 1910s and the 1920s. Because that was the true consolidation of power, driven by primarily the Rockefeller family, also the Carnegies and a few others, Morgans and whatnot. But that the consolidation of power in the 1910s and 20s truly happened when you look at what the Rockefellers were investing into regarding our education system. I mean, that they set the framework, they set the foundation in the 1910s for our indoctrination system we have now that we call an education system. They set those they set those foundations in the 1910s. They also set the foundations in those same years of the medical industrial complex, the allopathic pharmaceutical-based medical system that we're dealing with now, at least in this country here in America. The foundations of that all set up in the 1910s, primarily by Rockefellers and the Carnegies too. So,
and that you're absolutely right about that era. And so, in order to understand that era, let me just spend a minute or two explaining how we got to that era. That video kind of touched on it, but they weren't hitting the angles that I want to hit, because this stuff is so relevant to what is happening even in the past 15 months. So let me pull this up. So as they kind of mentioned, they briefly touched on U.S. Steel and the concept of a holding company. But let me just explain that history there. So in that video, they mentioned how Rockefeller, the original Rockefeller, who is this guy right here, John D. Rockefeller, he understands that there's serious risk in looking for oil, right? So he's not going to go waste money and time and resources and take the risk of trying to find the oil. He's going to let other people do that. He's just going to come in and buy the oil from them and then focus on the refinement. And then the byproducts of that refining process is where we get into your wheelhouse. But before we get there, there were other oligarchs, robber barons as they were called at the time, who were doing the same thing. And before we get the antitrust laws, before we get the government's war on the monopolies, right, which was probably less of a war and more of like a elite merger, we get this guy, JPMorgan, and that's the name that many people are going to recognize. So JPMorgan, famous for a number of reasons, but obviously created the bank. But one of the really important things that he did that still impacts us today is the consolidation of the steel industry. So in the late 1800s, in the 1890s, basically the entire steel industry was headquartered in Trenton, New Jersey. This is something that I actually learned from my architecture profession because we did an airport there, and I had to learn the history in order to develop the concept for the design concept for the airport. And I was blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like all the stuff that I research on my own, personal time now studying it professionally. But you had John Roebling, all these different German immigrants. The German engineers were just so brilliant. They understood how to refine steel. They understood how to metallurgy. They understood all these different processes and then how to turn them into a business. So one of these guys was John Roebling. He figured out how to braid copper wire together to make cable. And his cabling company in Trenton, New Jersey, basically becomes the cabling company for everything. I mean, everything from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Brooklyn Bridge to elevators to ski lifts, like everything that had steel cabling in it came from the Roebling company in Trenton, New Jersey, and in the late 1800s. And so Morgan comes in and he starts buying up all of these steel companies in the same way that they explained Rockefeller did with the oil, where basically Rockefeller comes in and he crashes the price of oil intentionally. He brings in his competitors. He shows them his books. He goes, look, I can afford to lose money and remain solvent way longer than y'all can. So before you go bankrupt, why don't you let me make you rich by buying you out? And then I'll give you a job being one of my top guys at my company. You can continue to work in the industry. You just work for me now. That's how he consolidated the oil industry. JPMorgan did the exact same thing with the steel companies, including the Roebling company. And he creates this holding company called U.S. Steel in 1902. He then relocates the steel industry to Pittsburgh, and that's when Pittsburgh becomes known as the Steel City, right? But before that, it was Trenton. Trenton is now, of course, a totally dilapidated, just rotted out town. It's really sad. But the holding company, before I pass it back to you, is a concept that was developed by a law firm called Sullivan and Cromwell. If you are not familiar with this law firm, this is the law firm that would later in the 1940s become the CIA. So they employed both the Dulles brothers as well as a number of other lawyers who would go on to create the CIA. Because prior to the CIA and the other agencies, MI6, Mossad, etc., espionage was conducted through corporation, basically corporate espionage, right? And that was done by lawyers. So law firms for hundreds of years, for the past 1,000 years, were the mechanism that were the agents that were used to conduct espionage. And so Sullivan and Cromwell was a very, very important law firm that was doing this in the 1800s. Started by these two guys, Algernon Sidney Sullivan, William Nelson Cromwell. And so this guy, William Nelson Cromwell, develops this idea of the holding company. So a holding company is a company whose primary business is holding a controlling interest in the securities of other companies. A holding company usually does not produce goods or services itself. Its purpose is to own stock of other companies to create a corporate group. Holding companies are also conduct trade and other business activities themselves. Holding companies reduce risk for the shareholders and can permit the ownership and control of a number of different companies. They can be subsidiaries in a tiered structure. And then that leads you to a parent company. That's what they're more commonly referred to now. A parent company is a company that owns enough voting power in another firm to control management and operations by influencing or electing its board of directors. So these two concepts right here are the foundation for what we now call corporate America, where you have these massive companies that don't actually do anything except their sole purpose is just to own other companies. And as they explained in that video, when Rockefeller creates his, JPMorgan creates his, U.S. Steel being one of the best examples of that. Not only does it help them kind of sidestep these antitrust cases, right, and delay their demise, it creates a lot of complexity, and there's it makes it very, very hard to investigate them. It makes it very easy to launder money, to play the shell game with profits, and that sort of thing. You could be looking at an industry and see 50 different companies and then not realize that they're all owned by one or two or three company, like parent companies. That's what we see today with the media being a good example. But all of this traces back to this era, the Sullivan and Cromwell law firm. And by the way, Sullivan and Cromwell today is known for, They negotiated the SpaceX XAI merger this year. They represented Donald Trump in his criminal case. They represented the FTX guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, in his criminal case. So they're still around today, and they're still playing a very big role in our society. It's just interesting that it all goes back to like the 1880s, 1890s. So that brings us to the Rockefellers and the refining of oil, where the byproducts of that refining process give us other chemicals, and they find interesting uses for those chemicals, right? And I'll kick it to you now.
Yeah, and your description here of that law firm sort of creating corporate America with inventing the idea of holding companies and parent companies. When you look at the Rockefellers in the early 1900s as well, they were almost, I don't want to say inventing, but they were utilizing NGOs, private organizations that they would dump their money into, that they would then, these NGOs, before they were really called NGOs or non-governmental organizations, these private companies they would put their money into would then be used for philanthropy to help raise up the standard of living across society. So, I mentioned earlier about how the Rockefellers were instrumental in setting up our indoctrination education system. And one of the ways they did that in 1905 was basically through an NGO. So the Rockefellers put a lot of money into what was called the General Education Board. In 1905, I think they put a few $1 million into it in 1905 money, which is a lot of money now. And the General Education Board was a private organization that was used, that their excuse for it was to help raise up, basically fund public high schools, public universities, help create schools for the Negroes, what they called it at the time. So it was basically social justice warrior-esque, 120 years ago. But this General Education Board was basically, they said, let's build these schools. We're going to educate the public. It's going to raise the standard of living. But of course, under the feel-good phrasing that we're always sold by the establishment is their true agenda. And their true agenda was to consolidate education into standardized learning with testing, to make sure all the kids were brainwashed with the same narratives, and then, just take your standardized tests. So didn't John D. Rockefeller, isn't one of his famous quotes, "I want a nation of workers, not a nation of thinkers"?
Yeah, I believe that is correct. I'm not sure if that was the grandfather or the son, and I'll show you the distinction here. So here's the grandfather is the guy. It was the focus.
It was the
of
grandfather. It was senior.
Yeah, senior. Okay.
Yeah, that was him.
Yeah.
And so in 1902, Rockefellers funded the General Education Board, and the teachers' unions at the time, back before unions were liberalized and infiltrated and corrupted, the National Education Association at the time hated that. A lot of teachers hated the fact that the Rockefellers were basically privatizing education. And in 1914, I have the quote up here, the National Education Association put out a statement, and they said, "We view with alarm the activity of the Carnegie and Rockefeller foundations, agencies not in any way responsible to the people, in their efforts to control the policies of our state educational institutions, to fashion after their conception and to standardize our courses of study, and to surround the institutions with conditions which menace true academic freedom and defeat the primary purpose of democracy as heretofore preserved, inviolate in our common schools, normal schools, and universities." So the NEA in 1914, they did not like what the Rockefellers and the Carnegies were doing. In 1905, the Carnegie Foundation created what they called the Advancement of Teaching. So just another sort of NGO philanthropy organization used to push indoctrination into our schools. And then in the 1930s, education, the associations really became sort of infiltrated and liberalized. In 1932, the Rockefellers and Carnegies commissioned what they called the 8-year study, which laid the groundwork for education reform and the school system we have today. So I'm thankful that over the past 5 to 10 years that really it's like the LGBTQ agenda that's infiltrated our schools. It's woke a lot of people up to how liberalized and how corrupted public schooling has become. I'm grateful for that, but what people don't realize is that the infiltration and corruption of our schooling goes back 120 years. Like, it's not a recent phenomenon. And it goes far deeper than just social issues and pushing, the gender agenda and liberalism into our schools. Like, it's not just political. Every topic has been corrupted. The physics that we're taught in schools is largely wrong. The health information, the financial information, economic info, it's all corrupted and based on flawed understandings. And a lot of that in this country at least goes back to the Rockefellers in the 1910s.
Yeah. And it's like when you read through like the stories of all these different people, all right, the same names start coming up, right? I mean, you see like Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison is there, right? As opposed to Nikola Tesla. You see ExxonMobil and Chevron. Those are two names that are in the news right now, right? That's Standard Oil. Because Standard Oil is to the Rockefellers what U.S. Steel is to JPMorgan, right? And so what these guys are doing is they're doing what they call horizontal integration. So you have two different, there's vertical integration, there's horizontal integration. Vertical integration, an example of that would be Apple, right? Apple makes a handful of products and they basically do it turnkey. They control the start to finish of the creation of the product. They're not going out and buying components and putting together a computer like you would see Dell or another computer company doing. They're making everything themselves in-house, and they want total control. Supply chain. Yeah, over the supply chain. And so here's the example they give is like a car, like cars, right? You have the car buyer, you have the garage owner, you have the car importers, you have the car manufacturers, you have the suppliers, you have the commodity producers. So vertical integration would mean you own like a company at each one of these stops, and then you can consolidate it all under one roof, and you basically have a turnkey business. Horizontal integration is instead of doing the vertical, you just go out and you're going to buy every car manufacturer. You own every car manufacturer. It's a monopoly. That's what we would consider. It's
monopolizing the industry, but using different company names and different brands to give people the illusion of choice.
Yes.
So, a great example of that in our modern times is what I'm seeing in my forte is the supplement space and the health space. You've got Nestle coming in and they're buying up 15, 20 different supplement brands. So you think when you're in Costco or Walmart, you think that all these brands are different companies, but they're all owned by Nestle.
Yes, it's a great point. And, like right here, as it says, a company may do this horizontal integration via internal expansion or through mergers and acquisitions. And that's interesting because we just on my show the other day covered a news story where the Boston FBI office just arrested 30 guys that were indicted. 30 lawyers and bankers were indicted for tens of millions of dollars in fraud.
What country were they from, Ghost?
They apparently were all from Israel. That's what their names all look Israeli, but they were very interesting. But what they were doing is they were the lawyers who were basically working at law firms that were handling all these different companies, right? They were going into the files of these law firms, pulling out information for pending mergers and acquisitions, negotiations that are happening privately behind closed doors, haven't been publicly announced yet. They were then giving that information to their friends in the banking industry and saying, hey, this merger is going to happen here in a few months. Go ahead and buy the stock. And then once the merger is announced publicly, the stock explodes. Anyone who's holding the stock there gets rich. And so they were doing that over and over again. And you can see how horizontal integration, when there's one law firm or two law firms that are handling all of these different companies merging together under one parent company, you can see how that information can then be used to manipulate markets.
Nancy Pelosi hardest hit.
Yeah. Right. So this is how corruption happens. This is the essence of like how the American, I guess what we would call the deep state, right? I mean, that's probably too cutesy of a term for it, but this is how the American oligarchy has established itself. Whereas the European oligarchy established itself through bloody conquest, right? The American oligarchy established itself through lawfare, mergers and acquisitions, and corporate infrastructure.
Economic conquest, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about the medical industrial complex for a minute, because some of these products that are coming out of the petroleum industry, that because like they said, when Rockefeller first gets in the oil industry in the 1870s, oil really isn't that valuable, because the only thing it's really used for is like oil lamps, right? Kerosene. But he starts to get really obsessed with the refining process, and he goes out and he hires a bunch of chemists and a bunch of scientists, and understands, oh wow, when you make kerosene from oil, there's all these other different liquids that come out of there, and maybe we can do like not just liquids but other products as well. What can we find uses for this stuff? And suddenly you get petroleum-based medicine. So maybe you could educate people about the like as they call it, the homeopathic medicine that they referenced.
Yeah, and it's not just medicine, but also so many of our everyday goods, like polyester clothing and rubber itself. Rubber used to be made from trees.
Yeah.
And then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they realized that they could use petroleum byproducts to manufacture sort of a synthetic rubber. So instead, every byproduct of the petroleum processing, instead of dumping it or basically just, dumping it or throwing it away, they just tried to look at different ways of monetizing it. Like, what can we make out of this, and how can we sort of push it onto the public or persuade the public that this is good for them so they buy our products. So through the drilling of oil and refining of oil, oh, how convenient. Instead of just selling the oil or gasoline, we can sell 20 different things made from this oil and make a load of money on it. So in particular with the healthcare space, same time frame. In the 1900s and 1910s, first 2 decades of last century, it was the Rockefellers and also the Carnegie that worked to sort of consolidate the pharmaceutical industrial space, move our healthcare off of herbalism, naturopathy, homeopathy, chiropractic care, and move it onto a petroleum-based industry. So I believe it was about 1910 when the Rockefellers and Carnegies pushed out the infamous, what was called Flexner Report. And the Flexner Report was written by a man named Abraham Flexner, who I believe was just like an assistant or some worker at the Carnegie Foundation. And they commissioned him, they hired him to write this Flexner Report that essentially just degraded natural medicine and convinced the government and the public that allopathic care or care with drugs was going to be the way forward, how we're going to heal the world and get rid of disease. So after that Flexner Report came out, the government really started just destroying any kind of natural healing modality and propping up allopathic care, propping up the pharmaceutical industrial complex. And we can trace big pharma, what we have now, all the way back to a lot of Rockefeller dealings in the 1910s. And then all the other textile industries too that just do destroy our health. But, we mentioned rubber real quick, but also polyester clothing. Cotton started getting used less, and bamboo, and thanks William Randolph Hearst for destroying the hemp industry. But polyester clothing, polyester being a byproduct from petrochemical manufacturing, now we're dealing with a lot of petrochemicals and personal care products as well, from shampoos and conditioners to lotions. A lot of those are petroleum-based byproducts in a lot of that. And we see how so many people are having endocrine issues these days, hormonal issues. And these petrochemicals are endocrine disruptors. They're destroying our hormones. So it's no wonder why, when you really look at it, it's no wonder why we're having such health problems these days and why the medical industry is so messed up. And a lot of that is based on the petroleum industry.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that that video mentioned at the end was, the way that this history is told to us, like the mainstream telling of it, which is obviously being told by the perpetrators of it, right? It's like revisionist history. It's just like things just happened, right? It's like, well, this happened and then that happened, and it was just kind of like cause and effect, right? Cause and effect. It's like, oh, who knew that this was going to be the outcome of this intention, right? So what I mean by that is they say that when Standard Oil broke up, that was actually when Rockefeller became the richest that he ever was when his company was forcibly broken up by the U.S. government under the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1911. And the reason being is because, let me pull this up.
Did he have a controlling stake in every company that Standard Oil broke up into?
Yeah. So as it explains right here, he owns a large block of stock in Standard Oil, right? And so as Standard Oil splits into 34 separate companies, shareholders receive proportionate shares in each successor company. He now owns stakes in every single one of these companies, right? So each one of these companies now can go venture off and compete in the marketplace. And as each one succeeds and competes with one another, he gets rich off of every single one. So it's like having a monopoly in everything but name. And
he's got a monopoly in the monopoly.
Yeah. So all the oil companies that we're familiar with, BP, Exxon, Chevron, Amoco, like those all spin out of Standard Oil. And, a really good example of this, this cause and effect and, the way that our history is told to us is the Federal Reserve. So I would encourage everyone to go listen to Badlands Book Club. They're doing The Creature from Jekyll Island right now.
Nice.
Which is the book that explains the creation of the Federal Reserve. But what's important to know about that, as Matt Ehret educated me on, is there was a lot of awareness among these bankers like JPMorgan that the public did not want a centralized bank. They did not want the Federal Reserve to be created. So what they did, in addition to like the Titanic, and that's a whole story in and of itself. What JPMorgan did is in 1913, he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times on behalf of all the bankers and argued in the ad against the creation of the Federal Reserve and why it was going to be bad for the bankers and why the bankers didn't want it. And what this did is it had reverse psychology on the public. The public said, well, wait a minute. We thought the Federal Reserve was like something that was bad, but apparently these bankers think it's something bad. So we actually might want it now, because if they're this frightened of the Federal Reserve, then maybe it's actually going to be something good. We now support the creation of the Federal Reserve, all because JPMorgan took out this big one-page ad in the biggest newspaper at the time, New York Times, advocating against the creation of the thing that he was actually creating in order to trick the public into supporting it. And so I think that's just it's a perfect example of a psyop. But even back then, 113 years ago, they were running psyops against the public using the media in order to trick people into supporting something that was actually against their best interest.
And it was so much easier back then because there was no internet. So
yeah, exactly.
The prime only way people got their news was newspapers and word of mouth. But given that there were only 2 or 3 newspapers mainly, so easy. All you got to do is control one, run an ad in one, and you can trick the people against it. Yeah, I mean, the banking industry, the Federal Reserve, back when I was first kind of starting to question reality and waking up to everything going on in our world 14, 15 years ago, it was first through Big Pharma. And then I came across the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and how they were instrumental in our pharmaceutical system. And then I traced the Rockefellers over to, what's this Federal Reserve thing? Looking at, 1913, Federal Reserve created. Oh, and also these oil baron banking families were suppressing and censoring alternative energy technologies in the early 1900s too. So it's just the same. It's the same families and their tentacles weaved into so many industries in the first 20 years of the 1900s. And that's when I started going down all these different rabbit holes and realizing that those few decades of the early 1900s with the Rockefellers and Carnegies and Morgan it just laid the foundation for this slave system we're dealing with now.
Yeah. So let's get into that. Before we do, let's hit a few ads. So we are going to hear first from, we're going to do Mother's Day, even though Mother's Day just passed.
Last winter, the world met Madame Margie, the moistureless. But while Badlandia banded together at Gart, she evolved. While deep in her layer, she uncovered 4 sacred instruments of hydration. The lip balm, the lotion, the tallow bar, and the new stainless steel gua sha. Together, they wage war. Flaking has fallen, roughness retreats, dryness trembles, and among the rebels, Mother's good boy. But elsewhere in Badlandia, rebellion grows, the beards remain.
Shave them all off.
Visit softdisclosure.com and use promo code Mama's Boy for 20% off your Mother's Day bundle. Can't choose the right sacred instruments for your mother? Offer them all with an e-gift card. For softness, for victory, for moms.
These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA.
Love that ad. And just real quick, everyone just say a prayer for J-Triet. Just wanted to put that out there. So everyone just say a prayer for J-Triet and his family. Jay, we're thinking of you. Love you, man. So next I want to hit Goldco. It's officially a new era for gold and silver. Gold has broken $5,000 an ounce, and silver has surged past $100. In 2025 alone, gold jumped 64%, while silver skyrocketed 150%. And with political and economic uncertainty ahead, 2026 could bring even bigger moves. After such a historic run, a pullback is normal. Metals move fast, so some consolidation is expected, but top analysts are calling for even higher prices. We've seen the first bank failure of 2026 with regulators shutting down Metropolitan Capital Bank and Trust in Chicago. Could more follow? It's no surprise Americans are pulling money from banks and turning to the proven protection of gold and silver. Big news. Goldco is celebrating America's 250th anniversary with a limited time bonus. Get up to 10% free gold or silver plus free storage and a free home safe with a qualifying cash purchase. This offer won't last, so act now. Are we seeing the early signs of another 2008 style crisis? Don't wait for the next shoe to drop. Protect your wealth with precious metals, because in uncertain times, gold and silver shine brightest. Visit badlandsgold.com today for your free 2026 gold and silver kit and bonus buy. That's badlandsgold.com. All right, so let's now pivot to the era that you mentioned, like the 1920s, 1930s. We're getting into like now the bankers are really starting to take off. Right, the Industrial Revolution is in full swing. World War I has wrapped up. Right, so we got the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, right into World War I, and World War I. Basically, all these different countries got to flex after spending a few decades building up their armory, building up their munitions, and finally get to test out what all these new age weapons can do.
And also, what a better way to force the production and need for tons of steel, oil, gas, rubber than start a couple of world wars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and World War I is not really discussed that much in comparison to World War II. World War II, they've done a much better job of kind of fomenting this idea, this binary of like good and evil, this existential crisis. World War I, that was not present. It was really just Arch Ferdinand, right, is assassinated. And then because everyone has these overlapping alliances, it's like one by one, like dominoes, all these different countries are just kind of forced to go to war with one another because of agreements they'd signed. And I think the whole time everyone's like, why are we doing this again? Oh, okay. Well, we're just going to do it then. But again, like trench style warfare. So you're basically just living in like a trench for months at a time, with puddles of water at the bottom of the trench. You're getting gangrene in your feet. It's not like in World War II where the soldiers are out and about and running around in units. It's a really, really miserable style of warfare that leads to a lot of like psychological trauma and psychosis and just negative psychology on the people who come back from serving in that war. But what it also does is it changes the geopolitical landscape, because we get the empires are all formally broken up, even though they aren't really broken up. Kind of like how Standard Oil is broken up, right, into all these different oil companies, but the Rockefellers still own stock in all of them. The French Empire in Africa is broken up into countries. The Ottoman Empire is broken up by England and France, and we get the modern Middle East with all the modern national boundaries drawn in 1919 at the Treaty of Paris. The scribes, who are the lawyers who were there actually putting pen to paper and taking all the ideas down and drawing all the maps, are Sullivan and Cromwell, specifically the two Dulles brothers, who then 30 years later go on to create the CIA. And all of these nation states, no longer empires, they're now nation states, are now industrializing and gearing up for the next big conflict, which of course is World War II. The bankers in New York City and London and Paris and Venice are funding all sides. They're funding the Third Reich in Germany. They're funding the Bolsheviks in Eastern Europe to overthrow the Tsar. And so they're basically creating the conditions for there to be this massive geopolitical conflict, which of course comes to fruition in 1939. But all of this is being driven by financial interests, by bankers who are looking to not only consolidate their power economically and politically, but also to, I think, destroy cultures that they see as an impediment to their control over the world, right? Because as long as there are strong European cultures, a strong American culture, there's going to be resistance to the centralization of political power around the world.
Totally, man.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll kick it to you. I don't know where you want to take it from there, but I just felt like I was ranting too long.
No, this bringing it back to the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. We went through their consolidation of education. We talked about pharma. Your wheelhouse is more the banking understanding. I'm thinking of anything else I can add. Another being that you brought up JPMorgan earlier, and also Edison and Tesla. Of course, another thing they were doing in the early 1900s was undercutting any kind of alternative energy technologies that threatened their oil, gas, coal paradigms. So don't need to go into JPMorgan and his suppression of Nikola Tesla, but over the course of the rest of the 1900s, kind of later on in that century, really just 30, 40 years ago, the Rockefellers had always had an interest in sort of suppressing any kind of alternative energy understanding and bringing in UFOs into the mix, which goes hand in hand with alternative energy sources. But given that in the news, we're seeing this topic very popular in recent days, weeks, but the Rockefeller family has also been involved in, I don't want to say UFO disclosure, but UFO psyops more so. Limited hangout disclosures sort of designed to cover up alternative energy and alternative physics information under the guise of disclosure. So back in the early 90s, Lawrence Rockefeller was kind of starting a disclosure initiative that was probably a half-truth disclosure initiative, but it was called the Rockefeller Initiative. And he brought in some very popular names in the UFO space to his ranch in, I think, 1992 or 1994. But Stephen Greer was there, Linda Moulton Howe, Bob Bigelow. They all met at the Rockefeller Ranch out in Wyoming for a weekend as part of this Rockefeller Initiative. And I believe Hillary Clinton was there, not at that meeting, but I think a week beforehand. And there's a very famous photo of Lawrence Rockefeller walking with Hillary Clinton from that meeting. And Hillary Clinton has a book in her hand. I think the name of that book was Are We Alone or something to that effect. But the sort of liberal arm, Democrat arm of the American New World Order, if you want to call it that, the Rockefellers, the Hillary Clintons, the Democrat side of things, they've been laying the foundations for a half-truth UFO disclosure psyop for 30, 40 years, at least since the early 90s. And the Rockefellers were, very involved in it. I don't know. Have you ever seen that photo of John Podesta, his picture right next to Lawrence Rockefeller?
No, but now I want to see it.
Dude, Google it real quick and see if you can bring it up. They look almost, it's uncanny how much they look alike. And some people have wondered if John Podesta is like a illegitimate bastard child of the Rockefellers. But, John Podesta, of course, being a part of that. Yeah. Right.
Wow.
There. So Lawrence Rockefeller on the left and then John Podesta top right. But, of course, John Podesta involved in his own, in that liberal Democrat half-truth disclosure nonsense. So,
isn't that the lead singer of Linkin Park right there too? Because I know there's the conspiracy theory that he's like Podesta's son. I mean, he looks a lot like him. I don't know if he really is, but all three of these guys look like they could be brothers or like twins, triplets.
I wanted the Lawrence Rockefellers there to the left. He died, I think, just a few years ago. But yeah, when did Lawrence Rockefeller die? But yeah, the uncanny resemblance between Lawrence Rockefeller and John Podesta. And it's just curious that John Podesta is also involved in that sort of Democrat limited hangout disclosure stuff.
Yeah. So you make some great points here, because like energy is really at the center of like all geopolitical discussion right now because of what's 100%. what's happening with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, and the decision as General Quast has discussed with all of us, you specifically, in the shows you've done together. The decision was made to either go with Tesla's model or Edison's model, right? And Edison's model, which had wires, was far easier to monetize, far easier to measure, and could be implemented in the way where they could control it and also get rich off of it by charging by having a surcharge on.
It was centralized.
Centralized. Yeah,
they needed something they could control and centralize.
Yeah, and so getting back to the education, we'll hit the education, then we'll go back to banking. So as I said before, the Rothschilds and then later the Rockefellers are funding the creation and the fomentation of socialism in the 1800s, right? The Rothschilds fund a guy named Moses Hess. He is an intellectual thinker in the early 1800s. He's known as the communist rabbi. In Paris, he writes 7 books in the 11 years before the Communist Manifesto was written. Which is published in 1848. He publishes 7 books on communism and socialism. One of them is literally called Communism and Socialism. And his 2 students, of course, are Joseph Engels and Karl Marx. And they have this big falling out about, what Zionism is and what the communist revolution should look like. And Moses Hess was very religious, and he said, hey, we should all peacefully immigrate to Palestine and create like the perfect communist society. And Karl Marx, who was an atheist, said, you know what, I think we should have this revolution everywhere at all times. And they had, kind of a split And so that's where he writes the Communist Manifesto, which then that book, instead of the Moses Hess books, is promoted by the Rothschilds and spread around Europe, which creates this foments the idea of socialism. And the reason it gains traction is because in Eastern Europe, you have this very large ghetto known as the Pale of Settlement, which was created by Russia in 1791, abolished by the Bolsheviks in 1917 after the Tsar and his family is murdered. And so the people who were living in this extremely impoverished place in Eastern Europe, which is modern-day Ukraine, modern-day Belarus, modern-day Poland, they were so poor that when like the Habsburg armies and like the Prussian army and the Russian army would have their wars in the 1800s, the soldiers would complain because the winning side would then go into the villages to like rape and pillage, and there was nothing to steal. They're like, these people are so poor, there's literally nothing to steal from any of them. And so that's where socialism really, really foments. And the people who come out of there go and create schools in Germany. One of them, of course, is the Bauhaus School, which is an architecture school. Another one is the why is it escaping me? What's that famous school? It'll come back to me in a minute. But when Hitler comes to power, these people are all Jewish. He says, all right, well, I'm going to come after you people. So you better get out of Dodge before I come and get you. And they all flee Germany. Right. And they land in Europe. This is in the 1930s. Or I'm sorry, they land in America, and they all have jobs waiting for them at the largest institutions, at the Ivy League schools, not only as professors, but also as the deans of all these programs: architecture, art, history, the sciences. And that is where you get the socialist takeover of academia, and the origin of it. And the Frankfurt School is the school I was thinking of course. And so that's where like the modern bastardization of American academia comes from that. And it traces its roots in Germany and Eastern Europe. And all those ideas were being funded by the Rothschilds. And then, of course, the Third Reich is what is the catalyst that drives it west. So that takes us to 1934. The Rockefeller family puts their fortune into a trust. That trust is administered by Chase Bank. That makes Chase Bank, by 1952, the largest Chase Manhattan Bank, the largest bank in the world. And the trusts, this trust has all those shares from those oil companies that we mentioned before, right? So they are extremely wealthy. And they then create the Rockefeller family using that trust. They create, pull this up, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and this is in 1940. Okay, so this is the founders are John, Nelson, Lawrence, Winthrop, and David. Those are the five sons of this John. So you have John Sr., right? And then he's the guy from the video that we were learning about. Then you have his son, John D. Rockefeller, and then he had five sons. One of them is Nelson, one of them is David. You mentioned Lawrence. But these two are the ones that are really the focus of what I want to discuss here, because in the 1950s, these guys are at the center of banking and politics. Nelson Rockefeller is the 41st Vice President of the United States, serving from 1974 to 1977 under Gerald Ford. David Rockefeller, his brother, is an American economist and investment banker who served as the chairman and the chief executive of Chase Manhattan Corporation, the oldest living member of the Rockefeller family from 2004 until his death in 2017. So what they do is they commission a program called the Special Studies Project. And so the Special Studies Project was a study funded by they fund all sorts of initiatives, NGOs, political programs, and whatnot, merging, academia with banking, with politics, with real estate, and kind of blending it all together, right? Energy, medicine, pharma. The Special Studies Project was a study funded by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and conceived by its then president, Nelson Rockefeller, to, quote, define the major problems and opportunities facing the U.S. and clarify national purposes and objectives, and to develop principles which could serve as the basis of future national policy. The study ran between 1956 and 1960. Nelson recruited Henry Kissinger, who was then on the faculty of Harvard University as director of the project. He had first met Kissinger in 1955. He also brought on board figures including Edward Teller. Let's see. Let me pull this up real quick because I actually have
president of the Carnegie Corporation.
Yes. Yep.
Rockefellers and Carnegie, same thing. Hey, you know what's funny?
Yeah.
Guess who bought Lawrence Rockefeller's $35 million Manhattan apartment? Les Wexner.
Really?
Friggin' Les Wexner bought Lawrence Rockefeller's apartment in New York. Anyway, you just
that's
webs, right? The webs we weave.
That's a great connection. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, I'm gonna have to write that one down. So the board members include Edward Teller, who is a physicist and chemical engineer, known as the father of the hydrogen bomb, and of course connected to the Rockefellers. Charles Percy, who is the president of Bell and Howell Corporation, the telephone company. Dean Rusk, who was the Secretary of State under both JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson, the second longest serving Secretary of State after Cordell Hull from the Franklin Roosevelt administration. John Gardner, the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under Lyndon Johnson, strong advocate for citizen participation, and founded Common Cause, became known as the father of campaign finance reform, right? So we have him to thank for that. He was also the president of the Carnegie Corporation. And Henry Luce, who was the American magazine publisher who founded Time, Life, Fortune, and Sports Illustrated, among others. So he's like a media magnet, right? You also had Lawrence and John D. Rockefeller on this board. So they create 6 panels. They were constituted to look at sweeping issues ranging from military, security, strategy, to foreign policy, to international economic strategy, and Defense Department and governmental reorganization. I'm going to read through these real quick, but basically what this is laying out during the Eisenhower administration, both what would become the neoliberal and the neoconservative platforms of basically just spreading tentacles all over the world, right? The spread of democracy, the spread of American greatness, the spread of American culture. And it's sold to the American people as, hey, we have the greatest culture in the world. We have the greatest society in the world that all of you are proud of. We should spread this to everybody else, right? And everyone else should have what we have. We shouldn't deprive the world of American greatness, but we now know that that's not actually what they were spreading. So the 7 panels are: panel 1 is international objectives and strategies. Panel 2 is international security objectives and strategy. This is the one directed by Henry Kissinger. You have panel 3, international economic and social objectives and strategy. You can imagine what that's about. Panel 4 is U.S. economic and social policy. So they're, social engineering and economics. Panel 5, U.S. utilization of human resources. Panel 6, U.S. democratic process. And panel 7, the moral framework of national purpose. And so now this one, I think it says the report was written but never published. But you can imagine what that last one was about, right? The moral framework of national purpose. Now, again, in the 50s, you had a very homogenous society, right? A very wholesome society. The nuclear family was at the center of it all. So it was probably very easy to sell these ideas to the American public because you didn't have all the social engineering and division that you have today. But now we can look back and see that this was the seed corn of what became a very, very subversive political platform in the 1970s. Now we'll get deeper into that with Henry Kissinger next week because Henry Kissinger is at the heart of this whole thing. And yeah,
Epstein was on the board of the Rockefeller University back in the 90s. You could probably do a whole web connecting the Epstein network to the Rockefellers.
Oh yeah, and I bet you that we're gonna see Robert Maxwell pop up all over that thing. Because remember, I think it was 1953, because we did 2 chapters on Robert Maxwell, and each one was like 3+ hours. Robert Maxwell, it was declassified later, but Robert Maxwell at MI6 admitted to this. In the early 1950s, I want to say it was 1953, MI6 basically financed for Rockefeller to buy out a big publishing house in Germany that was publishing scientific papers. And they basically created the character of Robert Maxwell. Before that, he was just like an intelligence operative for MI6.
Yeah, Robert Maxwell bought, or at least property at Rockefeller Plaza in New York from the Rockefeller family.
There you go. And so Springer, I think, is the name. I have it somewhere on my mind map here, but Springer something is the publishing house. And so what Robert Maxwell does is he goes around Germany and Britain and the rest of Europe and gathers up all the white papers that all these scientists are working on and puts them under one publishing house, right? And then these become the white papers that are going to like fuel the Western education system. But the other thing he does is he establishes contacts through Israel and through the Jewish diaspora in the Soviet Union. And he's the one person, this is like the thing he was proud of. He was the one person who could walk into the White House and be treated like royalty and then walk into the Kremlin and be treated like royalty, right? And so he goes to the Russians and he says, look, the Soviets, and he says, I can publish papers for y'all and y'all can get scientific white papers published under my publishing house. And British intelligence loved this because everything that was handed to Robert Maxwell was handed to British intelligence, and they suddenly knew everything that the Soviet scientists were working on, right? And then Robert Maxwell would lie to the Soviets and say, hey, I'm going to publish 50,000 copies of this book. He would really publish 5,000 copies. They would pay him for 50,000 copies, and he would launder the money. And the way he would launder the money is he would put it in a bank in Bulgaria because there was a firewall between the Western banking system and the Soviet banking system. He was the one person who was allowed to move money between the Soviet Union and Europe. And as soon as you moved money between like Switzerland and Bulgaria, there was no way to track it. So it was the perfect vehicle to launder money because once you moved it into the Soviet Union, once you moved it out, it was clean. Nobody knew where the money came from. So he would use that system to launder his money primarily through Credit Suisse. But yeah, and again, the Rockefellers being connected to all of this is big.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah. Okay.
Good
so we can kind of start to wind down here. I'll kind of give a little teaser. And what we're
talk about the Kissinger connection there that you're gonna start getting into next week.
Yeah. So Kissinger is he's fascinating character in the sense that he had this major impact on geopolitics, but basically he just has this, he calls it a pragmatism, but his quote unquote moral framework for politics was just understanding that power is power and that there really is no morality when it comes to the wielding of power. And so understanding that we need to basically work with the evil in the world and accept that evil exists and accept that we're gonna get along with it. Now, in some sense, that there's truth to that, right? I mean, we shouldn't be going around knocking down doors and knocking over governments because we don't agree with the culture behind it. But that's kind of somewhat the argument that Kissinger makes, but he inverts that, and it actually becomes the mechanism through which the neoliberal and neoconservative movement ultimately is formed. But for example, he says, an international order accepted by all the major powers is legitimate, whereas an international order not accepted by one or more of the great powers is revolutionary and hence dangerous. Thus, when after the Congress of Vienna in 1815, the leaders of Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, and Russia agreed to cooperate in the concert of Europe to preserve the peace after Austria, Prussia, and Russia participated in a series of the three partitions of Poland. In Kissinger's viewpoint, this international system was legitimate because it was accepted by the leaders of all five of the great powers of Europe. Now, what's important to understand about the Congress of Vienna was after Napoleon, right, was defeated. All of the ruling monarchs of Europe got together in Vienna and they said, guys, these democratic revolutions are a disaster. Like the American Revolution has started something. We can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. That led to the French Revolution, which thankfully failed. But we now have revolutions popping up all over the place, and we need to get this thing under control. So we need to restore the monarchies. We need to bring back, the aristocracy, and we need to have like a relief valve of sorts for the people, so they feel like their voices are being heard and their grievances are being heard. But we need to crack down on this and get rid of all these thinkers that are a problem. So this is something that Matt Arid has also educated me on. So what they do is they go about creating a blacklist. This is in Europe, not Kissinger, but in Europe. They create a blacklist of all of the academics, the academic thinkers in Germany and Europe that they view as problematic. The guys who are promoting ideas of freedom, promoting ideas that are, the American spirit, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and they ban them from working at any university in Europe. And this list is sent around to every university and said, do not hire these people. It's a do not hire list. So all of these people are then, these thinkers, these academics are then forced to immigrate to the United States. Now, this is a net positive for the United States because we then get a bunch of, based sovereign-minded thinkers. But it's a huge detriment to Europe because Europe then loses those people, those intellectual thought leaders, and they're basically left with a bunch of monarchs and inbred royals who then focus on consolidating their power and building empire, which is what they do throughout the 1800s. And then that culminates in World War I, which we already went through earlier.
Do you know off the top of your head any examples of some prominent academic that was on this list that came to America?
Oh, I don't, but Matt Arid would. So I should get Matt to elucidate that because he has that list, I think, in his head. But he routed it off to me like a year and a half ago when he first educated me on, like 2 years ago when he first educated me on this. It could have been 3 years ago. So
okay, I'm just curious.
But yeah. But like in the early to mid 1800s, you get a big influx of academics from, I mean, just not just academics, but just immigrants from Germany. That's when you really get like this huge migration of Germans from Europe to the United States, and a big part of that was the Congress of Vienna and the fallout from it. And so Kissinger's looking at that, like we look at that, and we're like, well, this is where Europe went wrong. I mean, everything that Trump is fighting right now in Europe and trying to correct comes out really of the Congress of Vienna. And Kissinger looks at it and says, this is totally legitimate because the monarchs all agreed this is the way it should be. And so therefore it's righteous and therefore it's legitimate. And we shouldn't challenge that, even though it was morally backwards. And so he says, let's see, as long as the decision makers in the major states were willing to accept the international order, then it is legitimate, quote unquote, with questions of public opinion and morality dismissed as irrelevant. And so that idea right there is the seed corn that becomes what George Bush describes in the 90s as the New World Order, the rules-based international order, which you are now seeing being toppled, dismantled by the current Trump administration.
Awesome stuff, man. You're going to get into all that next week?
Yeah. So next week we're gonna pick up with Kissinger, and like I was thinking we were just gonna do this all in one episode. I was just gonna run through Kissinger in an hour and a half, and like again, like when I started going into the backstory, I was like, "There's no way this can be done," and it's gonna have to be a 2-part Kissinger episode. But then when you and I started talking behind the scenes, I realized I was like, this needs to be a Rockefeller episode. So we got the Rockefellers done. We'll do the Kissinger next week. And like Kissinger, because what Kissinger does is, as I said, when the Rockefellers pluck him out of Harvard and put him on this commission in the 50s, that leads to him becoming, I mean, he's still teaching at Harvard, but that leads to him becoming the Secretary of State under Nixon, right? Because that commission wraps up in the 1960, and then you get JFK in as president. We all know what happened to him. Johnson then comes in because they kill JFK. They take over. That's when the deep state, I think, formally takes over the United States. And then Johnson comes in, and that leads right into Nixon. And Henry Kissinger is Nixon's Secretary of State. So in 1971, one of his students from Harvard, he goes to and he says, hey, man, I'm working on this project, this international rules-based international order that we're trying to set up to counter the Soviets. I need you to go to Europe because that's where he was from, and set up the elites, get the elites organized in Western Europe. That was 1971. That student's name was Klaus Schwab, and the organization he went and set up was the World Economic Forum. 2 years later, David Rockefeller goes and gets one of his protege and says, hey, I need you to go set up the elites from Japan, the elites from Western Europe, and the elites from North America and form what became known as the Trilateral Commission. And the guy who he sent to go do that was Zbigniew Brzezinski, who becomes the national security advisor in the late 70s under Jimmy Carter. And one of the most significant programs that he creates is Operation Cyclone, which is, of course, where we go and we fund the Mujahideen using a Saudi royal by the name of Osama bin Laden, right? And we say, hey, we will build schools, educate your children if you go fight the Russians in Afghanistan, because we want to create like a Vietnam for the Russians. The schools that we build, of course, are radicalized schools that are designed to radicalize the children. And in 1988, we take all the children from those schools and we create Al-Qaeda. And then finally, I'll land it here is Zbigniew Brzezinski, who, of course, is the father of Morning Mika Brzezinski, longtime rival of President Trump. Zbigniew Brzezinski writes a book in 1998 called The Grand Chessboard. And in The Grand Chessboard, it's basically laying out the future of the Middle East and what we're going to do in the Middle East, what we, the establishment, the rules-based international order is going to do there. And he basically says, in the unlikely event that these three powers that right now don't have any relationship with one another, but in the unlikely event that they do form a triumvirate, that's the only thing that can stop us. The only thing that can stop the rules-based international order is the unlikely alliance between Russia, China, and Iran. So at all costs, we have to prevent those three countries from coming together and forming an alliance. And that, of course, is exactly what's happened now in the past 5 to 10 years. Is those three countries have come together. So,
and isn't it great that over the last 5 to 10 years, Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger, and David Rockefeller have all kicked the bucket?
Yes.
In the years of Trump, too, during Trump's first term, they all curiously and awesomely died. I guess David Rockefeller died during the Biden years, but we can theorize as to the Biden years. But Kissinger, Brzezinski, and Rockefeller are no longer on the chessboard.
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, let's hit one last ad. We have Van Man. Hopefully I have this. Yep, here it is. Ready to upgrade your daily routine with truly clean, natural products, no exceptions? Start in the kitchen with Van Man's Pure Cooking Tallow. Perfect for the high heat cooking and adding rich, clean flavor to your meals. For your daily cleanse, try their gentle tallow soaps, the classic honey, pine tar, or coconut. These bars deliver a rich, natural lather that leaves your skin feeling clean, soft, and refreshed. Give your smile a real care with Miracle Tooth Powder in flavors like Mint Bone, Cinnabone, or Original. Customers rave about whiter, stronger teeth and fresher breath with no harsh chemicals. Van Man also offers great products like hair care, eye cream, and more, all made with clean, natural ingredients, no exceptions. Right now, enjoy free U.S. shipping on orders over $40. Head to badlandsmedia.tv/VanMan today. That's badlandsmedia.tv/VanMan. And the last thing we're going to discuss is GART, because we have GART 12 coming up in, I guess, about 5 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks, 6 weeks. June 25th through 28th, Badlands Media is heading back to Deadwood, South Dakota for the 12th stop on the Great American Restoration Tour. Whether you're attending in person or virtually, a GART veteran or virgin, there's something for everyone. Early bird prices for virtual tickets are available through May 15th. Merch packages are now also available for both in-person or virtual ticket holders. Get your GART 12 tickets today at badlandsmedia.tv/events. And I was actually at a wedding with some friends from college who I haven't seen in years, and I was just talking to them about all this stuff. And they might be coming to GART, so we might get kind of a rowdy crew at one of these GARTs, either Deadwood or Vegas. We'll see. But nice. I think it seems like people who are not really following politics are suddenly, like, their mind is now ripe for harvest. Like, they are now interested in this stuff because they see that we're breaking out of this old system that sucks, right? And they have no interest in going into something new and exciting. The technology disclosures, the alien disclosures, I think all of this is part of that. It's great to see.
You've got your 5 to 10% of people that are just brainwashed by the media and there's no hope for them. But I think especially with social media getting less censored and the algorithms helping conspiracy content go around, but the normie mind is opening a lot collectively, and they're just super interested in all this kind of stuff. And you more than open to having the conversations about it. Not that everything you lay on them is going to stick and they're going to outright believe you, but their minds are super open. It's so much easier to have these kinds of conversations than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. I went to dinner with my college roommate on Friday, and just him and I, and he's had TDS for 10 years. For 10 years, he's viewed Trump as, through the lens that the media presents. But speaking to him and just like patiently talking it through with him, I realized that he really didn't track, by his own admission, didn't track politics at all. Didn't even know about Space Force. Like I was sitting there, I was like, I think you're kidding, right? You've never heard of Space Force? He's like, I have no idea what that is. But then we sat there for like 2 hours, and I just like talked him through all the stuff, gave him some of the, Trumpomania ideas. And the next night when we were at a wedding from a mutual friend, he came up to me and said, man, I was down the rabbit hole all night last night. And, I think you actually changed the way. I think I've been looking at Trump the wrong way this whole time. I'm now open to looking at Trump in a new way. And I think that is promising, because I think we have people who have not been invested in this stuff who are now finally getting invested. And I think that's really exciting.
Oh, the cure for TDS is Gordon. Found it, man.
Hollywood Hulk Hogan, man. Hollywood Hulk Hogan in the heel turn. I think that metaphor seems to click with people, where they're like, oh, it's the heel turn. Okay, I see it now.
Nice.
All right, man. Well, thanks again, Jordan, for joining us. This was a good episode, informative, and connecting a lot of these dots, because it's hard, I think, for people to understand how all this stuff is connected. But when you understand that a dynasty like the Rockefellers really can connect it all, and it goes back to the same era, and it goes back to banking and pharma and all of that, it's fascinating. So even though we went way back in time on this episode, I think it laid a strong foundation for what we're going to talk about next time. So thank you again for joining us. Can you tell everybody where to find you?
Just go find me on X. Down there is the account handle. And I don't know exactly when you're putting this show out, but every Friday on Badlands, Nate and I, we do Maha News of the Week. So you can find my Badlands show there. And yeah, everything else on X page or website, jordansather.com.
Yeah. So we're running this show tonight. Everyone go to the Badlands Media Substack. Go to today's news brief. That is the news brief for May 11th. I was the editor on it. At the bottom under bonus item, that's where I put the article about the UFO disclosure, and I linked Jordan's X thread, where Jordan's just been listing out all the stuff he's been finding from digging through that.
Oh, cool. So, you linked that. Thanks, man. Yeah, honestly, that dump from the Department of War was underwhelming, very underwhelming. But I'll keep digging into it over the next few weeks. So,
but it sounds like they're going to keep adding to it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think weekly they said they're going to be releasing more stuff. So we'll see what comes out. Maybe start easy and ramp it up, or who knows? But
yeah, that makes sense. It's like now they've already gotten people open to the idea that, all right, this stuff exists, and then now they can start maybe dumping some heavier stuff in there. We'll see.
Yep.
All right, man. Well, thank you again. This has been Chapter 51 of the Book of Trump, and we will see y'all next time.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.